Hi everyone, and welcome back to Ecclesiastes. Trust the imminent announcement, it's Monday, of what's going on is keeping you all excited, although I don't think much is going to change too much. But anyway, hey, welcome everybody. We've been looking at Ecclesiastes, and the key startup is life is Hebel. Life is the briefest of breaths. And we are caught in a world that is relentless. The sun rises, the sun sets, the wind goes north, the wind goes south. There is a cycle of life that is in creation, but we are Hebel. We're a brief breath. We pass through this world. And then second, but we try to, what the writer of Ecclesiastes calls, we try to shepherd the wind. We try to make the uncontrollable, try to put it in our control. And last session we looked at was this whole thing of the pursuit of being happy. That because we can't control life the way we want to, we do the pursuit of happiness. And he did escapism, and then he did achievement as he tries to be happy, and he finds joy in his work, but also the awareness it can't last, and that too, that whatever he achieves is going to be Hebel. It's vanity, because some idiot's going to get it and they may screw it up. So that's where we left it. And I guess chapter 3 is a transitional chapter, and it's the most well-known piece of Ecclesiastes. It begins with, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. We know it well because of the song that Pete Seeger wrote, and the Byrds made even more popular. Do everything, turn, turn, turn. To everything there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. But I want to start by basically today talk about time and how weird it is, really. But time is a curious thing. So I just want to show you this cookbook I've got. It's a Palomar. It's a Jewish cookbook from a restaurant in London, and I'm working on this recipe. It's pretty good. It's called pork belly with ras el hannut, dried fruits, and Israeli couscous. Now, how can you resist that? And so I'm going to finish that tonight, but I began it yesterday. It's a 2-day recipe. You have to cook it, and then you have to cook the pork again today. But you're getting the fat out of it. You're doing all sorts of stuff. And just before the lockdown, Karen and I did a Persian cooking class in Wellington. It was Persian New Year, creating the meal, about 8 to 10 dishes. And the lady said, to make this dish is about 3 days. And I thought, well, that won't happen. And now I find myself cooking this 2-dayer because I have time. So I'm very excited to finish it tonight and just see how it turns out. But time is interesting. We often feel like we don't have it. And when we do have it, we don't want it. But we saw that time in creation is sun up, sun down, wind one way, wind one, and the next, the tides in, the tides out. This continual movement and this continual cycle of life. And I was reading a little bit of Peter Senge, who's not a Christian, but he's an interesting thinker, and he's trying to challenge management to think long term rather than short term. And he makes this comment: the world is made of circles, and we think in straight lines. And he's arguing that so much of management cuts all sorts of corners, trying to make things happen quickly all the time. And we are living in a world of circles rather than straight lines. And in this passage, we're introduced to 14 circles or times: a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. She's just thinking of that phrase, a time to tear and a time to sow. Carolyn loves ripping my clothes when I've worn them out, and she kind of has pleasure in tidying up the wardrobe slightly, I think. And one of my favourite shirts had a hole in it. I said, could she sew it up? And she showed me all the holes in it and said, it is finished, let it go. So I'll have to let that go, that shirt, although she has conceded I can wear it at home, which is nice. But there is a season for everything under heaven. Okay, so we're still under heaven, life without God. Okay, and in this life under God, under heaven, there that we're given these 14 rhythms. It's a interesting number because 7's the number of God. So we've got 2 lots of 7, and they're couplets. They're balanced. So there's a time to be born and a time to die. That's the most brutal one. And it's reminding us that we're Hebel right from the start. But then it goes into a number of others, to plant and to pluck up what is planted, to kill and to heal. And I suspect that's a reference to, if you're a farmer, you'll heal and you'll look after your sheep or your whatever. But there will come a time when you'll kill them. That's a part of the rhythm of life, a time to break down, a time to build up. So sometimes you're ripping up things, taking things out of the soil, and then you're putting stuff in, building up the soil, building up your property or whatever. But then it moves into all of life, time to weep, time to laugh. And these are paradoxical things, and we like to think we're in control of the season and times that we're in, but we'd always choose a time to plant and a time to heal and a time to build up and a time to laugh rather than the other ones. But the reality is life brings all those things and we don't get to choose when. And what we're being told here is there are times that are complete opposites and we don't get to choose. I don't get to choose when a death touches my life. I don't get to choose that. I don't get to choose when a birth touches my life, unless I'm involved, of course, well, that would be a different thing, and I'm past it. But anyway, there is all these things that are opposites. And even the simple things like throw away stones, gather stones. I'd probably only gather stones if I was making concrete or something, but they're the very simple things of life that he turns to. Time to keep and a time to throw away. But there's a time for these things. And he's suggesting that we don't get to choose that time. The seasons are not in our control. So there's a rhythm of nature, but there's also a rhythm that impacts us. And we don't get to choose when these things happen. Somebody was talking to me about looking after somebody's children, and they said how much they hated it. And they said that the children have been brought up by an expert in positive parenting. So they're never disciplined, they're never corrected. And nobody likes these children because they've been completely undisciplined. And so there's a time to love and there's a time to actually hate what your children's need of behaviour actually is. And you can deal with that. So even though the model of positive parenting has definitely got a lot of good in it, to only operate out of one is an ideology. To operate out of both is a way of life that we actually have to think, actually, this isn't good. Or even a time of war and time of peace, we like to think there is never a time for war. But some of previous generations would say there was a time. We just don't like these negative thoughts. Derek Kidner, my favourite commentator, says this: we dance to a tune or many tunes, not of our own making. So what we're being told here is that we don't get to choose the seasons we have to be in. Just as the world of creation has a rhythm, so life has a rhythm. And we don't get to call the tune. The tune is called often for us. And if we don't heed that, the damage is generally even greater. So the writer then goes on to something quite interesting. And from verse 9 on is some of the core theology of Ecclesiastes. So he says, what gain have the workers from their toil? After looking at the seasons and seasonal labour, what is the profit? And it comes back to that same phrase that's right at the start of Ecclesiastes in verse 3. What's the gain from the toil? I've seen the busyness that God has given to everyone to be busy with. Okay, so all these seasons happen to us. It's busy. We're always reacting to stuff. And then it says something really interesting. And from verse 11 to 15, this is the strongest God theology, I think, in Ecclesiastes. God is mentioned 6 times. Interesting that we've had 2 lots of 7, which is the number of heaven, so to speak. And now we have 6 references to God, which is a very human view of God. It's incomplete. And he says this, he, i.e. God, has made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, he has put a sense of past and future in their minds, yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. This is a very well-known verse because the book was written, Eternity in Their Hearts, and the book is arguing that every culture has a sense of the eternal. Now, the way my Bible translates it is that that God has put past and future in our minds, the awareness of past and future in our minds. And this awareness of past and future ghosts us. We tend to get snagged in the past, the wounds of the past, the brutalities that we really struggle to recover from are always with us. And so many people's lives are completely shaped by what happened and when it happened, and a continual replaying of the past. Whereas other people are completely future orientated, always moving towards, always ruthlessly trying to outwork their longing for the life they want. And this is curious, that we don't really live in the now truthfully. We're always looking back or looking forward. Eternity, the straddling of the beginning and the end is always with us, and we can't tune it out. And so it goes on to say that we can't even know what God has done from the beginning. And that phrase done it comes from the Genesis narrative that God did this and God did that. It's the sense that God is acting and we don't get it. So what we tend to do is develop ideologies or simple game plans to deal with the seasons. So I should do this or I should do that. But we really don't have a clue, because often we find ourselves in a season, we realise later, oh man, I've just had a bit of exile, I've had a bit of withdrawal and a time to seek God, like some of us find ourselves in. But the issue lies with us that we don't handle eternity well. We don't handle this past and future well. And then he talks about from 16 to the end of the chapter how death is going to hit us all. So the season of death is going to hit us. And we can't control that. We're just like the animals. Who knows whether we go up or down, he says. Who knows, but our fate's the same, and so everything is hebel. It's pointless, it's meaningless. But what we're told is, unlike the animals, we're wired with a sense of time, and we're wired with a sense of mortality. We know it's coming. We know there is a time to be born and a time to die, and we can't tune it out. There's this overallness of God can lead us to despair. It can all seem pointless, or we can embrace what he suggests we do, which is the present, that we eat and we drink and we enjoy our work. Now, in the midst of talking about eternity being in our hearts, that we are on our minds as past and future, the writer of Ecclesiastes says, let's be present. Let's be in the present. Let's choose to eat and drink. Now, there's nothing more everyday in being present like eating and drinking. And then he says, and let's enjoy our work. Let's be present in our work. This whole thing of presence is really interesting. Preparing for this, I ended up reading some quotes from a guy called Kazuki Koyama. He actually was a theologian at Otago, Dunedin University, part of the Knox faculty there. But he grew up in a Japanese peasant community and actually finished his lecturing in New York. But he, because he came out of a peasant world and a simple world, I think he saw things differently, and some of his writings are very interesting. He wrote a book called Water Buffalo Theology, and it's quite ecological. But his most famous quote is this: if Jesus is walking at 3 miles per hour and you're walking at 9 miles per hour, who's following whom? Now, where do we get that Jesus moves at 3 miles per hour? Well, Jesus walked. He walked everywhere. Yet we rush everywhere. And Kazuki is actually saying that if Jesus walks at a certain pace, maybe we should learn to do this in this life too. And so he uses the phrase, love has its own speed. If we're going to walk the walk of love and truly be present to each other and to what we're called to and to God himself, we actually have to walk at 3 miles per hour, not 50 miles per hour. I think church life, the Christian life, is very harried. In fact, the models that we're presented with is of high level productivity and quite ridiculous drivenness. And Kazuki is arguing that we walk at 3 miles per hour, that we slow rather than faster, speed up. I can't remember the author. I can't get the book out because it's in my office and it's inaccessible. But he wrote a book on finding the will of God. And he made an interesting comment that nowhere in the whole Bible does it tell us how to discern the future will of God. And he said, we've made the will of God about finding the will of God as what's out there for us. And he argues that nowhere are we told how to discern what God's will is for us, or how to discern the future for us, or even our own calling for that matter. The Bible is strangely silent on our future destiny. But what it is very loud about is practicing the will of God in the present. So in the present, we are called to love. We are called to forgive. We are called to serve. We are called to be hospitable. Just about everything the Bible instructs us about is to live in the present, and the will of God unfolds. Whereas we tend to be looking on this horizon or looking back, and we're called to be in the now, because the present is the will of God. So if I see something to respond to, or God nudges me to do this or that, that is me being in the will of God. And the will of God will unfold in the future as we step 3 miles per hour each day. And so the writer of the book argues that God is very flexible about the long term, but he is stringent in expecting us to fulfill his will in the present. This is the complete opposite the way I've lived. I've always been completely navigating towards this good God future, always, always, always. And there's nothing entirely wrong with that. But if I am not living in the present truthfully in community, and by the grace God gives me to respond to what he's saying in the present, there is no way I'm going to move into my good God future, because that is the way I navigate towards it, is I forgive my grievances, as I choose to serve rather than be served, as I make all these decisions. The will of God unfolds and the future comes rushing towards me rather than me rushing towards my future. And I think we've tried to rush and take control of our future and do the decisions that cause the future to take place. But if we do the will of God in the present, the future, the kingdom of God moves toward us. I think this is quite good. And it's pretty much the opposite to way vision and calling is talked about. All of it is about our ability to plan, discern and strategize us into our future. And I've done a bit of talking on that, of which I probably need to repent. I want to read a quote from Richard Rohr, who wrote a book called The Naked Now. And he's trying to say that the spiritual life is in the present. And he says this: the most amazing thing about Jesus, unlike almost any other religious founder, is that he found God in disorder and imperfection and told us to do the same, or we would never be content. He is arguing that unless we can, in the time to be born and the time to die and the time to plant and the time to heal, the time to break down, the time to build up, all of these rhythms, if we can't find God here, we'll never be content. We want to control these rhythms, seasons, times, but they're not in our hands. They're in the hands of God. None of us get to choose the season or the time we are in. And a lot of the time it's just smooth and we don't even think about it. It's just the normal thing of it's times to sow, it's times to seek, it's time to embrace if we've got, a relationship going on or whatever. But we can't control if the opposite will happen. And he is saying that Jesus' kind of faith, kind of lifestyle, embraces the disorder and the imperfection and doesn't fight it, but finds contentment within it and finds the fingerprints of God within these journeys that we're called to. So we need to come to peace with time. And this is a hard thing for me as someone who's aging and feeling the decline of my influence and powers. I'm aware that time is relentless and I can't fight it anymore. And I feel the past and present in my heart and my mind. And I want to manage it and I want to control it and I want to add value and achieve in this season of my life. But actually, I didn't get to choose being locked in. None of us did. All of us had other plans. But I think this season we find ourselves in is reminding us that time rules us all. And seasons rule us all. We don't get a choice. But how we respond will lead to whether we are content or a complete discontent, annoying person who really feels like life's been hard and done them hard. So the challenge is not to get embedded in a jagged past or drive ourselves to achieve a better future, but to find contentment in being fully present. I was talking to somebody who was watching a leader fail, and they said their problem is that they try to do everything quickly. So their meetings are done in half an hour and then they're going to the next thing. They're living a life of movement, and everybody they meet with gets frustrated because they're rushing off rather than actually giving them the time of day. And most of our problems occur because we just don't give time. It's worth spending time facing the season we're in rather than making big messes because we're relentlessly moving on. So be present. Face the time that you're in right now and try to discern, God, what sort of time is this for me? What are you trying to do? And not fight it. But the thing that Ecclesiastes is actually saying is often we don't know until it's too late. We don't know what season we're in. But eternity is in our hearts. And if we can keep this in mind, we can maybe discern that God is doing something. Because by his Spirit, sometimes, just sometimes, we do get insight. Okay, God, you're doing this. I can roll with that. So I want you to think about a time when you struggled to change gear, when you fought a change of season. For some of you, that might be easy. It might have been the death of a spouse, or it might have been the loss of a job, or it might have been the movement into the job you always wanted, and you suddenly find yourself in fulfillment, and you never have been. It can be a good thing rather than a bad thing. But think about a time when you struggled to change gear and adjust to a season. Most of the significant adjustments in life, the changes of season, the events in our lives, invite us into a God change, into a transformation, to find a different kind of contentment and fulfillment in a different season. Another quote from Peter Senge, just to finish off. He said something interesting I never thought of. I'd heard another variation of this quote. But he says, people don't resist change. I'd always seen it as people don't resist change, they resist loss. That's a quote from Holzinger. But Senge said this, people don't resist change, people resist being changed. Now that's brutal. I want to suggest that often the changes in seasons and times in our lives are an invitation for us to change. And we resist being changed. And I think the changes in our lives reveal how resistant to changing we really are. So, how is time for you? Does it feel like it's running out? Do you feel like you're in the sweet spot, this great time? Or do you feel like can you look back and see times when you've really struggled to adjust to a change in season? I want to suggest that you enjoy this season and don't fight it. You find contentment in it. But being aware that this season too will pass. Everything does. I just want to end on a little prayer from the prayer book from Mondays. Yeah, can't even find it. Here we go. God, our judge and our companion, we thank you for the good we did this day and for all that it has given us joy, Everything we offer is our humble service. Bless those with whom we have worked and those who are our concern. Amen. So may God grant you the grace to be at peace with your times and seasons. And may you become discerning about, maybe more quickly discerning about what they are so that you can embrace them more easily. God bless you.